Hi, friends. How's it going? So today we're going to talk about your synthesis papers and how we might revise them, make them ready for a kind of a final version of them. Hopefully you are applying whatever feedback your peer reviewers gave you. Again, if there's any issues, I got a couple emails about, a group member missing or something like that. If there are any weird problems, you should let me know. But for the most part, heard like it sounded like it was going fairly well. So there aren't a lot of requirements that are, make or break in terms of like you have to do this, like a word count or anything like that. So let's revisit. This is from your synthesis assignment sheet. So it asks you to, one, have the original prompt and make sure that it is clear and focused and follows the instructions for that. And we worked on that for a bit. You have at least 6 sources. Notice it says minimum. Some of you have been asking, is it okay if I add one more? Because when you're writing, you might find out that there's a hole in your argument that you need to fill, and that's totally okay. But you do want to make sure that they're all different types of writing. So if you haven't fixed that, a couple people had some things to fix when you turned them in originally. And then 2 different types of visuals. You want to make sure that your topic is covered from different points of view. Excuse me. So we are following the AP exam format, and I have the example kind of pasted in there where the source reference is in the box at the top. And then you have the sheet with the sentence in italics right there that explains what this source kind of is, and then you have the words. Said it before, said it again. Some of you have like pages and pages and pages for a certain source. It should fit on a page, right? Just like on the exam, you only have 15 minutes to actually read it. So if you, sat for an exam, which obviously you won't do the synthesis question, but if you were, you would have 15 minutes to read all this stuff, so you don't overload and plan it, right? So you don't want to overload your students, right? So in number 4 there, in the essay, you have to have at least 4 of those sources showing up, okay? One of them has to be a visual. That does not mean you need to copy paste the visual into the essay, but you should refer to it as, your understanding of that visual should appear in the paper. If you want a reviewer on in-text citations, it's right there. If this were an exam, source A, source B, source C would be fine. I would recommend that since it's not an exam, especially if you are one of the people going on to, say, AP Research, you might want to practice your citations as learned in seminar. We would have spent more time on citations. That's one of the things that, just to keep your online lessons manageable, we had to kind of trim down, but that's okay. You'll get it again senior year. Everybody does a research paper of some sort. AP Research does capital R research, like they're actually conducting their own research. And then all seniors do some sort of using materials to find out more kind of research. So everybody will get citation practice before you go to college. All right, so let's look at samples from 2 different papers. And as we go, I'm going to ask you from time to time to pause the video. When you pause the video, you are going to take a second and read what I ask you to read, whatever's on the screen. I'm going to just pause for a couple seconds, and then I'm going to keep going because I'm going to assume you are following directions and you are pausing and reading the stuff. Cool? So here's prompt number 1. Pause for a second and go ahead and read it. So we can see that there are 2 sections in our prompts. We have our sort of introduction section. We sort of have our direction section, right? Remember this intro part is kind of the context for the situation that we're in. The directions obviously are giving us the info for the exact essay that you want us to write. So, I might suggest in the top one that there's maybe something just slightly more specific. That might be a little bit vague, right? Which decade are we talking about, for example? Context is best when there's something specific in there that the reader can kind of latch onto. More clues, more ways for them to generate ideas. Let's read our directions. Imagine you are going to start a workout plan of your own that consists of you working out every day for a month. Read each of the following sources and then synthesize information from at least 4, it would be 3 if you followed the model, and incorporate it into a well-developed essay that identifies the key drawbacks associated with working out every day. Every day is 2 words if it's I do it every day. The only time it's 1 word is when you use it as an adjective, when it's describing something. I'm drinking a Monster right now. I drink a Monster every day because I have caffeine problems. 2 words, every day. My everyday drink is a Monster, right? So then it's 1. Anyway, you're going to use 4 sources, like we said. My issue with this one is that it really only gives 1 viewpoint, right? You want, ideally, like for you to write your own essay, that's totally fine. But let's say it was for the whole class to write. What if somebody doesn't want to write about the drawbacks? They want to write about the upsides. Why you got to be so negative? So I might phrase it with that identifies the, how are they phrasing it now? That develops your position associated with working out every day. Oh, your position on the pros and cons of working out every day. Something like that. Let's look at number 2. Number 2 looks a bit more like the test example. So go ahead and take a look there. Let's pause, read it. So the one thing that's here that isn't in the other one is that bottom stuff, right? The first 2 paragraphs are the most important part. If we are indeed trying to make it just like the sample one, we would have that information on there. It's pretty easy. You can just kind of copy paste or copy that over from the sample. And then you have your list of sources here at the bottom. I think that's helpful. In this one, this has a few more specific details, right? And it kind of explains what this concept is. We can't assume that the people coming in have enough, immediate context if it's like the main thing you're writing about. So if there is something to define, that might be a good place to do it. And then in our directions, again, this is a common thing because the sample one, we changed up to 4. Sample 1 said 3. In a well-developed essay, synthesize at least 4 of those sources to create your argument to defend or challenge the claim that public defenders are not able to adequately represent and defend their client. I think that's fine. I think we did mention that the new way to say that is to create your argument that develops your position on whether. All right, there, like that. So if you have a different wording, that's okay. Some of the samples, were from previous years. Remember, this is the first year that they're going to change it. So I guess next year will be the first year officially that they change it. So I think that's fine. But the nice thing about this is it allows people to take whatever side, whatever angle they want on it, which is nice. All right, so let's look at intros. Oh, no, let's look at a sample entry. If you look, this one looks pretty much just like the test ones. Again, it fits on one page. This is a longer article. It's been chopped down to make it fit. We have the source up here in the box with the reference. And then we have this sentence here. And the main idea is to identify what type of source it is. That is your primary goal. People aren't familiar. So you might want to make sure that yours has all three of these parts. All right, now let's look at the intros. So there are two intros that are gonna fit on the screen. Now they're gonna fit. So go ahead, hit pause, and why don't you read both the intros, and then we'll talk about them. All right, so after you've read, then pause one more time, and can you identify the thesis statements in each one of these intros? So I would say that in both of them, it looks to be this last sentence, right? It is my belief that it is because with the proper rest and recovery, anyone can maintain a consistent workout regimen when motivated. Can we argue that? Sure. We do not need this. It is my belief. We could just go ahead and get rid of that. Because it's sort of like that I think. And I always say it with a little bit of attitude with it. If you say your thesis like, I think it's because I could do it, it doesn't sound very confident. Just say, it's because with the proper rest, you can do it. Right? So generally, I think that it's my belief that my hypothesis is, my thesis is any opening with that. You can pretty much cut that out and then just start with whatever comes after it. Although I would say it is, watch those starters. I think I would notice just a writing thing. Everybody has these that, they're kind of fallbacks. I too like to start my sentences with, because this thing is going on, here's the thing, right? With the intro clause, but mix them up with the end. Be mindful of that. So thesis, okay. It could be slightly more specific, I think. My question, however, would be, does it actually answer the prompt? So here's the end of the directions. Blah, 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 incorporate it into a well-developed essay that identifies the key drawbacks associated with working out every day. Do these match? Now, you've already written an essay. It might be easier to change the directions at this point than change your thesis. But you need to make sure that your thesis statements for everybody match your prompt. They're actually answering the question that you wrote. So let's look at the second one. This one has a bit more of a, longer sort of attention getter at the beginning that we can sort of relate to. Your audience, your purpose. So if that suits your essay, that's great. It definitely grabs attention. I can hear the Law and Order music in my head when I read it. So we get down to the bottom and we have our thesis here. Factors such as economic discrimination, shortage of resources, and overwhelming caseloads make it so that no matter how hard they try, public defenders cannot do a good enough job of representing their clients, which then violated the right to a fair trial. Can we argue that? I believe so. I might make this violates because everything else is try, cannot do. Everything else is in the present. So that should be in the present as well. Seems a little wordy. I might suggest, can I, make it a little bit clearer? If there's any place in my paper that I want to make sure I am specific and clear and to the point, the thesis would be a good place, right? Because if they don't understand your thesis, it's hard to follow everything else. So you don't want to make the error of making it overly complicated. Cool. Mind the, I don't know if people notice as you're reading, mind the commas places. Yeah, cool. All right. So take a minute, push pause, go to your paper, and why don't you look at your intro and your thesis and do two things. One, is my thesis arguable and clear? Two, does my thesis actually answer the question that I posed? Go do that and then resume the video. All right, let's talk body of the paper. So here is a sample body paragraph from the workout prompt. Go ahead, push pause, read the paragraph. So I feel like maybe we're missing some details here. There's a few spots that are specifically detailed, micro tears in your muscles, Neosporin and Band-Aids, scraping your knee. Those are specific references. The first couple sentences seem more on the vague side, right? Rest and recovery are a lot more difficult to maintain as there are more variables in play. What you put in your body, how much rest you give it, those are pretty broad statements, right? Now, a little bit of that is because we're not reading the previous paragraph, so it's referring back a little bit to what came before. But it's also in need of a little bit of specificity. Remember, when we were doing argument, we kept saying specific examples, be specific, more specific. Is that specific enough, right? So when in doubt, be a little more specific, that'd be great. What does it mean to train religiously? Some people are religious, but they go to church twice a year. Maybe they only go to the gym twice a year. Is that training religiously? I don't know. They just pray that their body will get better instead of going, jokes. So you get my point. You might want to be specific about that. Now, we've got our sources here, and they are labeled, and that is great. We've used two of them. However, in some circumstances, it might be useful for us to know what the source is, not necessarily all the time. So if you're using the source to just give us a basic piece of information that if you looked it up basically anywhere, I don't think you need to really reference it very much. But if your source takes a viewpoint or it has a very specific statistic or something like that, you might want to say, in source B, so-and-so says whatever, or just the so-and-so. Smith argues that recovery is as basic as healing a wound, right? So if it's general statement that's just kind of facts, great. Source A, source B, that's awesome. Although, again, I might practice doing actual citations, like put the person's name just so you get in the habit. But if it might be helpful for your audience to know what the source is or the type of source, you might want to put some of that information into your sentence. Cool? How many sentences we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Kind of on the short side. If we were actually doing the timed right and you guys did your drafts with timed rights, cool. Since it's drafted, you have the time and space to develop this a little bit more if you'd like. Whether you're direct quoting or indirect quoting with your two sources here, generally you want to make sure that everything is explained and built out from there. So you might take the fact from source B and then add something from your own experience or your own learning to build off that to make it more specific yet. Let's go to sample 2. Push pause, go ahead, read the paragraph. So both of these examples use you frequently. If you are doing a workout, having them represent you, to many it seems like your fate is already sealed. Who's your audience? So in this case, if your audience was people awaiting trial that are debating whether to just use the public defender or, to find their own lawyer or to represent themselves, probably a bad idea, that would work, right? But you probably want this to be more inclusive of everybody. So you might just say many upsides to having them represent, clients or say defendants, but we already have defender, 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 defend, defend, defender. So I might not use defendant. There's a lot of them, right? But I might find a way to make that specific as we go, right? This is sort of jumping ahead when we get to the end, but as always, I might remember Control F, defend, right? So I only have a couple paragraphs out of here, not a whole paper, and there's 36 of them, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Actually, let's go defend, because then we get the defense ones too. So there's a lot. I always kind of suggest that, but whatever your primary topic of your paper is, that's a great way to just kind of instantly find ways to make your word choice a little bit better. Cool. So for this one, it's quite a long paragraph. There's a lot of information here. So my suggestion here would be, 1, how many sources do we use? We use the 1, which is fine. Is all this information playing off that source? Is all this information from your sources? Could it be? So it is totally okay to bring in information from elsewhere. But remember, you want the information that you bring in from elsewhere, let's say your own class experience, or maybe you had, in this case, you were on a jury or in a trial. I don't think you can be on a jury yet, but you get the idea. Then you could bring that information in. If we read through here, it's a little on the vague side. There isn't like a specific example. For example, this person was charged with breaking and entering, right? And kind of walking through. But it's also not clear where it's coming from. Its specific connection. It's a good example of when we talk about, is your evidence specific enough? Is it explained enough? I'd imagine that most of the people reading this right now at their computers in their houses have not done a lot of thinking about whether or not public defenders are good, right? So having more specific evidence will help be persuasive to those readers. Well, so most of you have 3 body paragraphs, I would say, as I'm going through. Some people have 2. I don't think there's any, well, I don't know. Might be a couple with 4, but I don't think I remember seeing them. And you have at least 4 sources to be used, which, tells me that there's probably at least 1 in each body paragraph, and one of them is going to have a couple. There's no reason you can't use them more than once. There's no reason why you can't, have more than 4. And again, you can use information that isn't in one of your sources. Make sure, though, that every body paragraph has at least 2 points that you're making, even if it's not from the source. So if we were to look through here, do we have 2 different points that are really being made? Or are we kind of just getting stuck on one and elaborating and elaborating and elaborating, right? I think there's more than one. We kind of shift here. In theory, this happens. Another positive is that this happens. Finally, right? So we do have more than one point to make. However, like I said before, I think we could make those points more specific. I think a case would be really helpful. So, suggestions for your papers overall. Number 1, check the repetitive word choice. Terrible at typing. Like we just said, right? Control F your words. Go through and look for keywords. Your fallback words, like we had the with at the top. Vague, it, that, right? Those kind of words. They're there for a reason, but don't overuse them. As always, is our was, were, be, been, being. If you can get rid of some of those, it will make your writing better, right? Verbs give energy. Don't have the lazy verbs. There's enough laziness in our life right about now, right? Sitting around all day. Number 2, try to use at least one direct quote for variety. If you have more, that's great. We didn't talk about using direct quotes, and sometimes sources don't lend themselves to quoting very precisely. Yeah. So think about that. Number 3, it's my mistake. I meant to pull a paragraph that had this in it, but make sure reference to visual makes sense. So imagine, if you will, that the person wasn't looking at the visual, right? Could they still understand what it is you're talking about? For whatever reason, sometimes when people quote from those, it doesn't really work. Like, without seeing the chart right there, it's hard to understand the point that they're trying to make. So make sure that you describe what it is that you're viewing to some extent. Yeah. And then number 4, look for the weaknesses you know you have. So a few of you, just proofing in general, it's a problem. Some of you, comma splices. Some of you, word choice. Some of you, being specific enough. Those are the ones that are the most common, right? That you can look at. So think about things that peer reviewers, I've told you, I don't know, you struggle with when we do like ACT mechanics. So think about the issues that tend to come up for you a lot, and make sure you look specifically for that. On the flip side, look for things you do well and make sure you still do them. Sometimes we're so busy looking for the mistakes that we forget that if we look for our strengths and really build out those strengths, that's going to go a long way. So those would be my things that I would focus on between now and Friday. Remember, Friday, you're going to turn them in by 2 so that I can look through them before, quote unquote, work is over for the weekend. And so I can get like messages to parents or something if we're missing papers, because missing papers is bad. As always, you can hit me up with some questions. We got office hours Tuesdays, Thursdays at 12. I'm here to help. So some of you are asking me a lot of questions, which is awesome. Some of you I have not heard from since March 20th or whatever. It'd be awesome just to, know you're still out there and you didn't program a robot to respond to homework assignments for you. All right. Cool. Have a good day. We'll talk to you later. Bye.